So before we start, in 2022 alone, there was a Scream sequel, a Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel, a Hellraiser sequel, a Halloween sequel, and an Evil Dead sequel. What a time to be alive. Where you wish you were dead. I love the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, differentiated by its later rip-offs by that little space between Chain and Saw. And I loved the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre way before all those wannabe film snobs saw that final scene play during that one year at the Oscars. Does anybody else but me remember that? Oh, wow! Never mind. I'm actually a huge fan of horror in general, and I'm not one of those pretentious dorks who only seeks out elevated horror like the Babadook. Elevated in this case quite literally. Look at that, that's cool. Let's put it this way. Evil Dead 2 is one of my favorite movies, period. And that's not considered elevated horror. My motto is, as long as it's a well-crafted, entertaining movie, it's already exceeded my expectations. But back to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I actually love it so much that I have this really cool collector's edition that I got a while back for way cheaper than it's worth. Ya boy's crafty. And also lives next to this awesome used video store. Yet, unlike other franchises where I'll seek out the box set of every film, for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, I only own 2 of them. That's because, well, this franchise is kind of bad. For me, it's actually up there with Halloween as one of the most pathetic horror franchises of all time. Maybe even more so because all but 2 of the movies in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise are bad. And when the new sequel dropped on Netflix earlier this year, y'all were acting like there hasn't been a terrible Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. And just like Halloween, this sequel is billed as a direct sequel, wiping all the other sequels, prequels, and reboots out of canon. Except unlike Halloween, this isn't even the first time the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise has done this. That honor belongs to the much maligned Texas Chainsaw 3D, and the only reason I rank that one higher than the new one is because it has Alexandra Daddario in it, and she's the most beautiful lady in the world.
I'm here!
Okay, second most, Maya.
I swear to God, if it's the last thing I do, I'm gonna get my hands around your throat.
So, for the reasons stated before, having 2 retcons within the same franchise, the timelines could be a bit confusing. But that's why I'm here to help you out. But, before we do, make like Leatherface and slash that subscribe button, and lacerate that like button. I'm trying to have fun with these calls to action, so cut me some slack. With a chainsaw? Preferably on that notification bell? So stupid. Part 1. Original timeline. This is the most straightforward timeline, only including the first 4 films in the franchise, those being the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, again, with a little space between Chain and Saw. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 from 1986, released a full 12 years after the original, and it's the only film in the franchise to be helmed by the original film's writer-director Tobe Hooper. But more on that in a bit. Leatherface. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, not to be confused with the prequel to Texas Chainsaw 3D, simply titled Leatherface. The only memorable thing about this movie is that hilariously stupid Excalibur-themed teaser trailer, which the movie pales in comparison to, because it has the same problem with most of the other sequels in this franchise, where it's just basically the first film again, but worse. It does have a pre-Lord of the Rings Viggo Mortensen and Dawn of the Dead's Ken Foree in it, but Rob Zombie's Halloween also has Ken Foree in it. Take that for what you will. It's also the only film in the franchise to be distributed by New Line Cinema, who is trying to have yet another horror franchise under its belt. But after it failed spectacularly, New Line abandoned the franchise, which should have been the end of it. Instead, we got Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, a sequel so bad that Sony shelved it and only released it after the film's 2 unknown stars hit it big 2 years later, and they decided to cash in, those stars being Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, which would be the only reason to check it out, but honestly, it's not worth it. After Texas Chainsaw Massacre TNG failed, you'd think that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Part 2, the Michael Bay timeline. You heard that right. Mr. I need a teleprompter to tell you why I personally love film Michael Bay.
The type is all off, sorry.
Rather, it was Bay's production company, Platinum Dunes, who specialized in making those terrible horror remakes throughout the aughts, like the Amityville Horror with Ryan Reynolds, or A Nightmare on Elm Street, where they turned beloved slasher Freddy Krueger into a pedophile. Thanks, Michael Bay. Where was I? Oh yeah, the Michael Bay timeline includes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003, the first of Platinum Dunes' crappy remakes. Look, I really hate this movie. I know that it has the original film's narrator, John Larroquette, and the original film's cinematographer, but that being said, this film looks way too polished. Part of what makes the original film so memorable is that it has that gritty, realistic atmosphere, almost found footage documentary style. Also, the new one has the John Larroquette narration too, so that's not really a stamp of quality. Furthermore, I actually have the same problem with this as I do with the Rob Zombie Halloween, which surprisingly is not a Platinum Dunes movie, and that's Leatherface's mask looks too scary. Let me explain. Leatherface stitches his masks together from human flesh, as he's based on notorious serial killer Ed Gein, who would wear the skin of his victims. But that's what makes his mask scary. But here, it looks too intentionally menacing. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. It also started that stupid trend of turning every silent slasher into Jason Voorhees, making him this hulking force of nature instead of the tubby hillbilly that Leatherface is. Even more so like Jason, this version goes for the whole I'm wearing a mask to cover up my deformities bullshit, instead of Leatherface wearing a mask to represent his different identities. Leatherface here is portrayed by Zangief himself, Andrew Zangief from the Street Fighter movie. Before we move on, if you really want to hate this guy, look up the bullshit he spewed when the original Leatherface Gunnar Hansen passed away. Oof. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, the first prequel in the franchise, fits into this timeline as well. Did you ever wonder how Leatherface became Leatherface? No? Too bad! I only saw this movie once and I really don't remember anything about it. I do remember that it wasn't scary, but most of these movies aren't fucking scary, so they all kind of blend together. Next, Part 3. The Reboot timeline. Still thinking making more Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies was a good idea, even though most of them were flops, studios greenlit a direct sequel to the original film, which means the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is technically the first film in this timeline, but every subsequent sequel is wiped from existence, and instead is followed by Texas Chainsaw 3D, a cash-in on the 3D trend started by Avatar in 2009. Why do I have this? It's littered with continuity errors, with Alexandra Daddario's character supposedly being almost 40, even though she's clearly 25, and terrible acting like this.
Do your thing, cuz.
Really, the only interesting thing about this movie is that Bill Moseley, who played Leatherface's brother Chop Top in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, in this one plays his older brother Drayton Sawyer, who in Part 2 is Chop Top's older brother, who is played by the same guy who played him in the 1974 film, but Part 2 isn't canon in this universe. It's confusing and it doesn't matter. This film was followed by Leatherface, which is actually a prequel to the 1974 film, set in the same universe as Texas Chainsaw 3D. And, much like Texas Chainsaw 3D, it's boring and stupid and not worth talking about. Which brings us to the fourth and hopefully final timeline. Part 4, the Legacy timeline. For the record, I'm completely making up the names of these timelines. I have no idea if they've been named, and to be honest, I don't care. In any case, like the previous timeline, this one starts with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, followed immediately by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What a lazy fucking title. Fitting for a lazy fucking movie. Again, like Texas Chainsaw 3D, this film ignores every film in the franchise but the first one. And, much like the 2003 remake, Leatherface here is just Jason. He even begins his killing spree because of the death of a mother figure. It also blatantly rips off Halloween 2018, bringing back the original film's final girl Sally for revenge. And her motivation and occupation is the same as Lefty's, Dennis Hopper's character from Part 2. So this movie doesn't have an original bone in its body. In doing my research for this, I found out that the movie had a troubled production, losing its original directors, made cheaply and not in Texas, and then dumped on Netflix. Also, the girl from Bo Burnham's 8th Grade is in this. I'm glad to see she's getting work. I wish it was in anything but this, but I respect the hustle. Mix in a tone-deaf subplot about surviving a school shooting and influencers trying to cancel Leatherface.
Try anything you cancel, bro.
And you'll get the gist of why everybody hates this movie. Is it the worst one? Maybe. I don't care. This franchise is stupid and should have ended at Part 2. Part 5. Recommendation. So I was going to end the video there and show like a graphic of the 4 timelines, but I wanted to share my lukewarm take. I think the best Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel is the second one, but honestly, which other one would it be? Part 2 is the only one with any personality, any style, anything that, unlike every other movie in this franchise, wasn't just the first one. Again, this isn't going to be a play-by-play of that movie, more just a recommendation because I don't think enough people talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. I think it has the same unwarranted reputation as Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, where it's the bad one that almost derailed the franchise. For the record, I love Nightmare on Elm Street 2, but that's a subject for a different video. So if you guys want to see an in-depth discussion of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, leave a comment below and I'll make it happen. Anyway, I feel like the reputation for part 2 is especially unwarranted, considering the bullshit that the director of the new one has been saying. Like, this is the sequel that Tobe Hooper would want. And not a lot of people have noticed the subtle humor of the first film, so I injected it here.
Something that stood out to me about the original that not a lot of people talk about is how darkly funny it is. So I made sure to bring a little bit of levity into this film as well.
Bitch, Tobe Hooper wrote and directed part 2, and it's a horror comedy. Also, this movie is made in such a way that making a franchise out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would have been illogical and stupid. But that didn't stop the Hollywood fat cats from trying and failing. Anyway, each sequel more boring and confusing than the last. Basically, what I'm trying to say out of that huge rant is, yeah, the new movie sucks, and you probably shouldn't watch it. But also, if you want a fun, underrated, direct sequel from the man himself who brought you the original 1974 masterpiece, do yourself a favor and check out part 2. It's magically macabre, the sets are awesome, the gore is great, and it's hilarious, giving us the Chris Farley-esque Leatherface that you never knew you wanted. Also, the original poster is an homage to The Breakfast Club, which is really funny. It also features an amazing, unhinged performance from Dennis Hopper, portraying Sally and Franklin from the first film's uncle, Lefty Enright. Get it? Mostly, you get two kinds of Dennis Hopper performances. The brilliant Blue Velvet kind, which actually came out the same year as Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Or you get the over-the-top Waterworld Super Mario Brothers Dennis Hopper, which, say what you want about those movies, he is so fun to watch in those.
You know what I love about mud? It's clean and it's dirty at the same time.
And finally, who doesn't love Chop Top? Arguably the best member of the Sawyer family. Did I ever mention that Leatherface's real name is Bubba Sawyer? Well, it's not in the remake, his name is Thomas Hewitt in those, but it doesn't matter. Here's a bit of a hotter take to end this video on. Even though I think the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a better movie, its influence and themes continuing to inspire almost 50 years later, I might actually enjoy part 2 more. If anything, I think they make for a fun pizza party double feature with some friends. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
Hey, you ready to film that bit I wrote? I've been working all day on this.
No, we're not doing that bit.
But I ruined a hanger for this.
Special thanks to Shara, Alina, Catherine, Ellie, Pinecone, the God King Maximus, Mia, Gadget Pipes Your Mom, Ahini15, Robith, and Rukix for supporting me on Patreon. And thank you for making it to the end of the video. I'm testing the waters on these shorter video essays, so if you like them or have a suggestion, leave a comment below and I'll keep working at it. I'm pretty excited for the future of this channel. I got some sketches coming and a big video hopefully coming out by May 13th. Any guesses of what it could be? Shit, now I have to commit.